Welcome back to another episode of the Rugby Room on the HallOfSportz Podcast. Today I'm joined by Veronique Landew, and we are going to be talking about a lot of the big games of the weekend because there was a lot of French dominance, as I have been calling it, over the past 24 hours from the round of 16 in the Champions Cup. How are you doing today, Veronique?
I'm very well. Unlike you, I'm going to do my podcast, but tomorrow my podcast is called French Rugby Connections, which is really aptly called because the French were on fire this weekend with 5 teams, for the first time having reached the quarterfinal. It has never happened before. I think the highest it was 4 teams in 2018. It feels good to be French this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And some very interesting games, and there was 5 teams, and yet there was still one game that was cancelled because of COVID. And then also you looked at the Lyon game, and they started off well but just couldn't hang in there with Exeter. But we mentioned those 5 teams, and we have Toulouse, Clermont, La Rochelle, Racing 92, and Bordeaux. So I guess the first one, as an Irish fan, a lot of Irish people do follow La Rochelle because of obviously the head coach in Ronan O'Gara.
Yes.
What have you been? Have you been impressed with the way that they have played this season? Because when we look at a lot of French teams, we start thinking of that kind of national team attacking rugby, that it's constantly offloading, free-flowing rugby. But there is a really good structure there that they've put in place where it's kind of the defense first and then play kind of the nice attacking rugby after that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I would say it's thanks to the influence of having, foreign players over the last 10 years. As you know, Ronan played before, for Racing 92. So players like him, players from the Southern Hemisphere, have been able, to bring a kind of a new way of playing rugby rather than the usual alley, which was very, very tactile. And you can see, in the last few years, the top 14 has become much more robust, much more coherent. And if you compare the English Premiership to top 14, I have to say the top 14 is definitely the strongest and more interesting league to watch. It's a pity we can't watch in the UK, but once a week, my colleague and I, Mike Pierce, we like giving an overview of what's happening on the top 14. And coming back to La Rochelle, they're doing really well. They are currently number 2 in the top 14. Toulouse is number 1. And like you said, Rohan O'Gara is doing a good job in for managing that the team. He can speak French as well, I've heard, which is positive. And they've got some strong players. They got actually. They got. Is it Bota? No, he plays for rugby. But yes, it's a strong team, and they are. There's one to watch them in the top 6 anyway, which is what they want them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one because I'd say the neutral rugby fan obviously has always been watching the likes of Clermont, Toulouse, recently Racing 92 since they kind of come into their age. But
yes.
When you wouldn't ask a fan that's like been deep into kind of French rugby about La Rochelle, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you too much about them. But the fact that they've been able to kind of put themselves, as you said, second in the kind of French league, and then also playing really good rugby, because you looked at that Gloucester team that they were playing against, and that was going to be a tough test because both teams defensively were very well structured, but also they do like to attack. So it was one of those that watching the game, I was really impressed with the way that they played, and in the fact that both in the attacking side of the game and the defensive side of the game. When I was kind of looking at kind of some of the stats in some of these games, and a lot of them, even though we say that some of the French teams were really, really good, that they're really close. Like even this game, when you look at even just the possession and the territory was 50-50 exactly in the game. You have the territory, the attacking kind of possession, which was 51% for La Rochelle and 49% for Gloucester. So you can see the difference. But where you kind of see the difference between, I think, the English teams and the French teams is on that kind of the quick offloading game, wanting to play quick attack. Because when you look at the meters gained, that's where you see the big difference, where you see 305 meters gained for Gloucester, while it's 547 for La Rochelle. We're starting to see this is kind of the trend within kind of French rugby compared to when you look at some of the English sides, even the Irish sides as well, that their attacking game is just that much more advanced to where it's really hard to kind of stop them and to defend.
Absolutely, I agree with what you just said. It's moving in the right progression. And another positive as well, since Fabien Gattier has been on board, he has been able to instill some renewal in terms of how to train the French team. It's very structured. There is no more unpredictability now. It's very analytical, very clinical, and I think it's going down through. All the way down to the top 14, is way of instilling, some different ways of playing rugby in a more structured, and less alley. So it's yes, definitely top 14 is a very exciting season, but even better is the European Heineken Championship next week, and also the Challenge Cup. I forgot to mention that Montpellier won last Friday. So it's all together. It's 6 teams actually, which are
it's really impressive because and what you mentioned there about Gauthier, which is really good, and I think I noticed it most. I think I expected it in La Rochelle to have a fairly good defensive system, but then when you looked at the Bordeaux and Bristol game, I think that game really showed kind of the high quality defenses from both teams, because you didn't see too many really clear line breaks. You're seeing kind of both teams being very, very well drilled defensively, but then you see there is that kind of sense of really good attacking play in Bordeaux as well, because they're able to kind of get those 36 points. But I think even though a team that comes away and scores 36 points, the fact that one of the most impressive sides of the game was actually their defense.
Yeah, absolutely. But having said that, Bristol Bears played really well in the first half. They were able to score that try really easily, which was a bit scary. And then the second try, but Bordelais were able to keep a cool head on their shoulder. But I know what happens. Probably Christophe Urios, who is a very colorful character, who doesn't mince his words, who likes swearing between brackets. I'm pretty sure he probably had a few words with his players, because what happened the week before is that they got trashed by another French team. I forgot who it was. Who did they play? I forgot. But they got tried the last week, so they had to put the wrong. They had to correct their mistake, and they were full of raring to go. But second half they got very lucky, I think, with some of the gameplays. They scored, I think, 31 points in the second half. But as I said, they got lucky. They made lots of mistakes. They were very indisciplined. I think they got, 15 penalties versus 8?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think they managed to They got win. That's what matters. So for Bordeaux Bègles, it's very satisfying because it's the first time they will go to the quarterfinal. Never happened before to them.
Yeah, it's good, and I guess one of the good things is kind of seeing it on the back of some of the younger players that are coming through that team, like Jalibert, that we all kind of know from the French national team over the past kind of 2 seasons, that so his performance was really good. And it's good to see in kind of a big European tie, because we always mention this with some of the young players, can they step up when it becomes that knockout rugby? Because a lot of these players, they don't get as much kind of these types of games. You see it in, like, some of these players might see it for the first time in a World Cup rather than being able to be in a big game in a now it's going to be quarterfinals going ahead. I guess the 2 games I want to focus on at the moment here will probably be the Clermont and Wasps game, because that was probably one of the more thrilling games of the weekend.
Yes.
Where I think one of the biggest takeaways that I got, I don't know if you agree, is some of the mistakes that Wasps actually made in that game too, where they kind of gave it away. So you see in the first half, they get off to that blistering start. They basically go over for a second try, but he knocks it on. And then I think the biggest thing for me is, well, both teams, I think it was a fairly well-matched game. But the one thing that I took from it is there was about 5 minutes to go and Wasps had a line out in the 22 in Clermont's 22, and losing that kind of, I think, put them back, because if they win that, they can kind of control the rest of the game and probably win out. But what does it tell us about Clermont that even when it looks like they're kind of dead and buried, that they can win that line out, come back and then score in the last minute? Because we've seen the flair players they have. When you think of Clermont and you think of the Champions Cup, you're like, they've been so close so many times. And while they're not one of the favourites, the way that they played was very encouraging for a lot of Clermont-Auvergne fans.
Yeah, well, they can say a big thank you to Matsushima, who has the last dying minutes. So kudos to them, because it was touch and go. They won, but only just. So I would say next week they are playing against another French team. I think it's is it Toulouse-Clermont? Clermont, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a done deal. I hope. I prefer Toulouse between you and me. Much prefer Toulouse. Been there. Went to their stadium to see Saracen play at a European Cup actually 4 years ago. Really, really nice. Amazing people there. I think Toulouse will win next time. With the caliber of players they have, they got Tamac, they've got Dupont, they have Chelsea, Kobe, and so on. And they've been there. They want. That's one of the only team that won 4 times the Heineken Cup, and I think they could win a 5th time easily. But this time around, I really, really, really hope, because they've been unlucky 3 times. They were the bridesmaid 3 times, but never the wife, the married woman. It's Racing 92. I think it was good for Exeter. That was their first time they won the championship last year, and they did a double. But Racing 92, I think it's about time.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because honestly, when I was looking at it and I saw Matsushima there, all I could remember is all the amazing play he had for Japan in the World Cup, and his kind of try at the end kind of was very reminiscent of that, getting that little bit of space and accelerating in to score a try in the last minute. It was really good. And I guess one of the things that you mentioned there about Toulouse, they do seem to be one of the strongest teams that are left in it, because you look at that Toulouse and Munster game, and for a large portion of that game, it looked like Munster had basically got through kind of the early pressure that Toulouse had put on, the early yellow card, and kind of come out ahead. But then you just see towards the end the kind of quality that Toulouse not only had in the starting 15, but were able to bring on from the bench. And it was just a little bit too much. And look, when you're able to score 40 points, when it hasn't been that perfect of a game for Toulouse, it shows the amount of quality they have in their side. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And regarding Toulouse, it's even better. I know it's not good for you because you're Irish. But, that's the first time that Toulouse has won against Munster in what's the name? In Thomond Park.
Yeah.
I think they got trashed the last 2 times they played, I think by 40 points over. So it's like a page of history has been written for les Toulousains, the new generation and so on. I'm not sure whether Meda was playing. Yeah, I forgot. But Meda
I think he was playing at 15 at the weekend. But it was one of the interesting storylines. On BT Sport they mentioned it a couple of times, that I think they've played 5 times or something like that, and it's been a while, especially around the kind of this stage of things, that Toulouse haven't been able to get over that hump of beating Munster at Thomond Park, which again, looking at the game, it was probably a shame that we are in kind of COVID times, because what a game that would have been to have a packed out kind of crowd there, great weather and some great rugby that we got to see.
Yes.
where do you think kind of the biggest strength of that Toulouse team is? Do you think it is in that kind of creativity in their backline? Because we've mentioned before where they have Maxime Medard, they have Intermac, they have Dupont, and they have Cheslin Colby as well.
They've got a very good training staff, Hugo Mola as well, who has been instrumental, who knows the Toulouse, inside out. Their passion, their expertise, they're a very close-knit band of brothers. And they've got massive, massive talent. Not only, French talent, but also, from Jérôme Queneau, who is really keen to win the Heineken Cup because he has won everything except the Heineken Cup, so it would be nice before he retires for him to win. So, yeah, it's a good melting pot of French, but obviously there are more French players. And another thing to be very thankful is the Toulouse Academy as well. Tamac and Dupont, came from that academy as well. And it's got so much history in Toulouse. You had Émile Tamac, Dupont, Romain Tamac's father who played there. You had Castagnède and many, Dussautoir, of course, many others. So it's lots of history. So strong. It's really linked to rugby. But to come back, to digress slightly, what I really like about La Rochelle is that La Rochelle is based in northwest of France, a bit further down Loire-Atlantique, not too far from Nantes, which is very much an area where French people don't really play rugby. So it's very positive to have some team, coming from that part of France. So it looks like, France, the rugby is really expanding. And next year, Vannes, is in Brittany near Rennes, is extremely likely to join the top 14. So it's going to create a more diversified type of rugby and more interesting rugby as well. So who knows, maybe one day we'll have a Vannes playing the Heineken Cup. I hope so. That would be nice.
Yeah, it's good because we've seen so many newer kind of French teams. Because when you look at kind of the neutral fans, where they be used to, like I said, Toulouse. Because since I was a little kid, I've always been seeing Toulouse in kind of the quarterfinals and semi-finals. But you mentioned some of the recent teams. You even look at Montpellier, Lyon, who years ago weren't one of these kind of established teams that you constantly saw. You would have seen teams like Perpignan or Biarritz that were constantly in these kind of areas. So it's really good, especially like you mentioned that La Rochelle is in an area where typically there's not a lot of people that do actually play rugby. So it is a very interesting one, and it kind of makes it so that you can build up that fan base there as well to, like you said, to expand the game for France. The one question that I have, I guess, is as someone that would follow the top 14 and kind of, do you think that people over there are more inclined to like kind of teams that can build up their own kind of players from their academy, like we've seen with Dupont and Tamac? Or do you think that there is still that kind of want for these established superstars that come through? So we have the likes of Kaino, who's come in from New Zealand. Do you think for some of the French fans watching, do they prefer to see kind of those young players coming through that they can soon see in that French national team? Or do you think that there's more people that like to see kind of these superstars like Cheslin Colby and players like that come through?
That's a very interesting question. There used to be a time that some team had a large number of foreign players. Now this is not allowed anymore. They have a quota. I can't remember what the quota is. So there is a restriction on the number of players. So obviously, if you talk about, big stars like Dan Carter, which was one of the highest rugby footballer paid, I think it was paid 1 million for the year, which was the highest contract. But he brought Racing Metros, Racing 92 club, a global fame. So it was very positive, was very good for the ticket office and so on. So it was good that's good from a marketing point of view to have those players as well to inject some of the savoir-faire and expertise. Having said that, they tend to come to France sometimes towards the end of the career. So they are, you got second best, but you've got some young players that have been coming to the top 14 a bit earlier. So you had, for instance, Hayden Thompson-Tringer, who used to play for Saracen. He's, I think, 23, 24. He plays for Brive. What do you have? You've got Gabriel Ibiotoge, who came from Wasp, who hasn't, played that well because he was playing for Agen, who obviously is going downhill. So now he's playing for Montpellier. Montpellier is going up. So he wanted to have the French experience first. So it's good to have a mixture of obviously older players that can bring some of the experience. But I think obviously, it's more rewarding to see some grassroots players who started from the an academy or playing in their village. Football man like Dupont. Dupont was playing. I think his Dupont's father started a rugby club in his village.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. And then his son becomes one of the world's best number 9s.
Exactly, and the rest is history. He spotted his talent, and even Dupont was even too good to play with players of his age, so he had to go up one class. And we've got lots of stories like that, which brings lots of warmth. And I think there is a player at Vannes. I think he was a bricklayer before he started playing professional. So there are some good stories, good field stories. So I think we are moving towards the French grassroots players. I think we prefer that kind of stories, because if you look at the past of the French rugby, we had some really, really great players such as Jean-Pierre Rive, Philippe Sella, really nice guy. I had a chat with him on one of my podcasts. He's got an accent even stronger than mine. That's true. Olivier Mann, Serge Betsen, all those players, from the 80s, 90s. And then we had terrible, terrible years, from 2011 until Fabien Gattier took over, basically. There was a lack of coherence. I think they had some good coaches, but there was something wrong in the team, team spirit. Team spirit wasn't there. Some internal fight between some of the players, which wasn't very, very conductive. Whereas now, the young people, they don't want, they listen to their coach, they listen to Fabien Gattier, and they're able to obey the rules. And
it's an interesting one, because I remember when I was watching the Six Nations on Irish TV, Ronan O'Gara was one of the analysts there when especially when the French team play, and they were asking what was the difference between kind of now versus when he was a player and he saw some of those players go off to France. And he said right now there's a hunger for a lot of these young players to get in that French national team, when before he didn't see it as much, and it was more of just some of these players expected to get in before. While now there's a lot of good players at each position, so they're fighting for their position. So that's always kind of the way you want to go. I guess one of the reasons I was asking about the difference between kind of bringing in those young players versus kind of trying to get in players from abroad is we have it to a certain extent here in Ireland as well, where you see Leinster are able to bring through a lot of their players from their academy. But because the academy system in some of the other provinces isn't as strong, you start seeing kind of players from abroad coming in and trying to fill in positions. Like we're seeing it at the moment in Munster with CJ Stander now going to be retiring. And there was, I can't remember exactly who it was, but there was another South African that's been brought in to replace him on the short term. And then there was other rumours of other players being kind of tried to be brought in. And there's always been that debate, is it better to provide that place for somebody kind of coming through your own system and give them the opportunity? And I always wondered it in France, because it must be difficult in France as well, because there are so many teams and it is very competitive now. You see, and we've seen it now with just the teams that are now into the quarterfinals. Before, you would talk about maybe one or two of the French teams being really strong. We've seen it at times where it's been Racing. Lately, you've seen Toulouse at times. Clermont, probably the years that Leinster were very strong, you always saw them play against Clermont in the semi-final, it seemed. So I guess now it must be very interesting because of just how competitive that league is. And we are starting to see some of those young players come through. We saw it with the under-20s when they were winning the World Cup, and kind of their kind of platform that they've done over probably the past 24 months with the national team. You're seeing all these kind of younger players come through and really make a difference. How important do you think it is for one of these French teams to win the Champions Cup? Because we've seen just how good the national team has been in the past 2 seasons, but just come a little bit short in actually winning. So like they had an excellent victory against Wales, but then couldn't finish the job against Scotland. So how important do you think is, even for some of these young players that were involved with the French national team, is that one of those gets to the final and can win?
Yes, I mean, don't forget, majority of the French players in the French team have an average 26 selections, and the average age is 24 years old. I think the oldest players is Gaël Ficou, grand age of 31 years old. So except Ficou, Leroux, and Brice Dulin, most of them don't have that much experience, so it's good for them to learn. I think they, like Nelson Mandela said once, you never lose. Either you win or you learn.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think they are at that stage yet. They're still, it's a work in progress team. They've done really well, but what they really need to work on is maybe towards the last 10, 15 minutes. Well, against Wales, obviously, that was wonderful. I think it was the adrenaline that kicked in and absolutely broke the heart of the Welsh. But for the rest, for the England team against England, they lost the plot a little bit, towards the end. And was it a try or not? Marot, was it the hand of God? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. So they've got a lot to learn still. I mean, discipline-wise, I think they're getting better. And because the top 14 is so competitive, it works in both ways. It works. They're very good in the top 14, and they're good. They're bringing some good and bad to the French team, and vice versa. When Bordeaux played this weekend, Christophe Orios did say to them, bring some of your Bordeaux, bring some of your French learning lesson with you to play against that team. So it does. You probably make them stronger. I know each team who play for the national team bring back with some additional skills, and vice versa can bring something. So so 2023 is not very long now. I think next year we should win the Six Nations. Third time lucky.
And then try and move it on to the World Cup. It's an interesting one because obviously all the stories this week with, I think, the tickets started to go on sale. So we're starting to see we're getting to that point, and hopefully it'll be at that point we'll be well behind what's going on with COVID at the moment, where we can all actually go and watch the World Cup and be able to see some of these really good teams. In terms of for those French teams that did get through, is there any of the performances that surprised you in either a good way or I don't think there'd be a negative way because they all got through, those 5 teams got through. But Brive. Were there any? Yeah.
Brive is going from strength to strength.
Mm-hmm.
They're on a winning streak. They got a very strong team playing there if there is one player I have to point out is Saïd Aresh, is the captain of Brive. And usually Brive overs around the 11, 12, but I'm much lower than that. But they are, I think, number 9 or number 10. They're very close to Stade Francais and others. So one team that has impressed me a lot this season. And I had a lovely chat on my my French Rugby connection with the president of Brive, Simon Gillam, who is a Brit, actually, Franco-British, man. So
Yeah, no, that's always interesting to see some of those kind of teams come through, because we do tend to see it's the same kind of sides get through into especially the European competitions in a yearly basis, and we have started to see some of these other teams kind of come up and kind of perform quite well. What do you think it says about French rugby in total when we have in the quarterfinal we have 5 French teams, 2 English teams, and 1 Irish team? For me, I just go back to the time when it must have been it was probably about 2012, 2013, around that point, where it was, I think Ireland had 3 teams I think it was in the semi-finals or quarterfinals. That was a big deal over here because it was one of those where you're starting to see kind of the impact of that Joe Schmidt at the time was having in Irish rugby. We've spoken about Galtier at the moment, and we're now seeing these 5 French teams into the quarterfinal. Like we said, we've never seen this happen before. What kind of state does that show that French rugby is in at the moment?
It's growing. It's exploding, I think. Could be a result of the 2023 as well, which brings much more enthusiasm, much more interest, not only from the players, but also from the fans. Last week, the game was watched by 8 million people on French TV, on Prime TV, which was on the national TV on France 2, which has been never heard of. So there is very much a really strong interest towards the French team and for the rugby in itself, and what it will represent as well when the Rugby Cup happens in 2023. And we've got we're very lucky. We got some very charismatic player. For 10 years, we had nobody, I'm afraid. Yeah. Before that, we had maybe Chabal, but it wasn't but we had obviously Sella in the 80s, Philippe Sella, we had Magne, but now we have so many to admire: Dupont, Tamac, Jalibert, Bay. So many comes to the head, and we've got even more talent than needed, because this is what happened during the Autumn Nation Cups. We had to fill 2 different teams because of the French LNR, which is the French Rugby League, which wouldn't allow players to play for more than no more than 3 games, and there were 6 games, so that to come up with a solution. So it's been incredible to see rugby playing really, really well as well. I think top 14 is probably, in my opinion, a better competition than the others.
Yeah, I think it's probably up there when you look at, in terms of when you actually watch the games. I think it's as exciting when you are watching kind of Super Rugby as well, because some of those games have been frantic, and you can kind of see just how good some of those players are from kind of New Zealand, and it's always good to be able to kind of compare the different leagues. The interesting one that you mentioned there is the fact that there's so many kind of star quality players. And growing up, I always kind of remembered the kind of, you have Michalak, Yashvili, Vincent Clerc, Rougerie, Poitrenaud. And for a good 6 or 7 years, when those players started to kind of retire, there wasn't that kind of succession plan for after when they were gone. And now we're starting to see that, where, like you said, that sometimes you can have kind of those second players come in and play just as well, and it shows having the 5 teams into the quarterfinal. I guess the last 2 points that we'll mention here, I guess the first one would be having the 2 quarterfinals with all French teams in it, where you have Bordeaux versus Racing, and then you have Clermont versus Toulouse. Do you think, as a kind of a French rugby fan, would you expect it to be as we would think, that Racing and Toulouse should get through those 2 matchups? Or do you think that one of those 2 matchups should be fairly close?
Would be wary of Bordeaux-Bègles.
Yeah.
You never know. They might pull a hat from their hat. No, a rabbit from their, you know what I mean.
Yeah, a rabbit from their hat. Yeah.
Exactly. What do you say? Sorry?
A rabbit out of the hat.
Exactly. So to be aware of, but I'm sure Stade Toulousain will have prepared a strategy to overcome them. But you never know. And Clermont, Clermont Toulouse. I see Toulouse winning, but again, it might be close. It's just. But no, I see Toulouse. I'm confident Toulouse will win. I'm 90% sure that Racing 92 will win, but Bordeaux, to be aware of, you never know.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess look, I think the last kind of point that's important to mention is the game that didn't happen between Leinster and Toulouse, because we've seen this now where it's happened a couple of times in the Champions Cup this season where there's been teams that have had issues with COVID and then they've ended up not being able to get through because of that. We've seen that again with a Toulon team. We've seen it similarly enough in kind of the Six Nations, which happened after the Irish and French game. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's a problem with some of the I guess the first thing is, have we seen much of it in the kind of top 14? Because when you ask people around, you're saying, is it to do with the bubbles that some of these teams are in? Because I know the French national team got a lot of criticism after the Irish game to why we were seeing such a high amount of positive COVID tests. And I guess, has this been an issue in the top 14 this season, or has this just been kind of an unlucky one where it happened, what was it, the day of the game?
So top 14, like every other rugby leagues, they have to go. I think they need to go through 2 COVID tests a week in order to play in the top 14. So it happens everywhere. And what happened with the Toulon situation is that on Wednesday, 1 front row was detected positive. So Toulon informed EPCR, and they were reassured that, however, they could still fly on Thursday morning to Leinster, to play the game. And then when they arrived there was a change of scenario. They were asked to change 6 of their players, 6 of their front rows, because they didn't really trust the front row player. We don't know who he is. They thought that he could have infected the other players, but obviously it was too late at that stage. So the game had to be forfeited. But it's very much, it's not the first time that it has happened, so it leaves like a very bitter taste to Toulon. And I think they're gutted, to be perfectly honest. They're disgusted by the Champion Cup. So I'm not sure whether they may want to take part in it, so they need to do some TLC from their side. I think the situation could have been handled a little bit better, rather than flying all the way to Leinster, only finding out in the afternoon that the game, had to be cancelled. And, it's they haven't had a chance, not really fair, so they played the rule, but it is what it is. But I can tell you that Laurent Lemaitre, who is the owner of Toulon, is very, very, very annoyed about the situation, as well as his player, because they had no chance to prove themselves. And it's not the first time. The same happened. Was it? Oh yeah, in Wales last year when they played.
It's an interesting one, because I wonder if what happened earlier in the Six Nations had maybe some of the decision makers, did they have that on their mind? Because we saw that, what was it, when they left Dublin after that game, that 1 or 2 of the players tested positive, and then many more of them kind of started to test positive after that. Was it that there was one player, as you mentioned, that was in the front row that they test positive, and maybe that they didn't trust him and that he wasn't around some of the other players? And look, it was an unfortunate situation. I think the problem was that the fact that the quarterfinals was the next week, that they couldn't really do much about it, and the fact that they've kind of set the precedent of they cancelled so many games early on with teams getting knocked out because they would lose 28-0. It's an unfortunate one, because it feels that the competition has been very strange this year. Yes. We've seen so many games get cancelled. We've seen, like, for example, we saw Sale Sharks get through into the knockout stages without winning a game, and then they go on and destroy the Scarlets. So it's been a really strange competition. I completely get why the kind of president of Toulon would be annoyed, especially with the way, I don't think a lot of people have reported exactly what kind of happened in terms of they were told that they could fly on Thursday. And then I know here we only found out about the game getting cancelled on the Friday. Everybody was expecting the game. I know Leinster tweeted about the game that very morning, and then I think it was an hour later that the game was cancelled. So
the same.
It would be very annoying, especially as one of the players, because look, if you knew the game was going to get cancelled and you didn't fly, it's a tough pill to swallow, and it sucks. But at least you didn't have to go through all that trouble of having to travel over and actually exposing the team even more.
And apparently all the French players were tested again in Leinster, so they were all tested negative.
Yeah, and
so that's why it's a bitter pill to swallow for Toulon. I understand the frustration.
It is, because it was one of those that I think everybody was really excited. It's that Friday night game, the first one to kick off the kind of the Champions Cup weekend, and you see two teams. Like, even as a Leinster fan, I would have preferred to see the game go ahead and try and win that way, because now you have to come up against Exeter, who are one of the best teams left in the competition, where now you haven't played in 2 weeks.
Yes.
So it's a difficult one. But again, it goes to show, I guess, how good kind of the French teams have been. The fact that we're talking about how monumental it is that 5 teams got through to the quarterfinals, and yet one of the teams that were in the round of 16 didn't even get to play.
Yeah, but you mentioned Leinster. It could have been Toulon winning. Leinster.
Absolutely. So, but either one, like, even if it was Leinster and they tested positive, it'd be the same, I think, situation. The fact that if Toulon were going in to go and play Exeter Chiefs, who are an incredibly tough team, and not getting to play the week before, it's weird to think of, is it an advantage or disadvantage? Because I guess one side of things is you're not getting injuries, or players that were injured can come back. But then on the other side is, we've seen it in kind of that round of 16 that some of the players were not kind of ready at the start of games, and you saw them kind of build up into the game. So it'll be an interesting one to see next week, is if Leinster do start slow, does not having that game against Toulon, does that kind of affect them a little bit? But yeah, look, it's, in terms of the COVID scenarios, I think it's one of those that we're hoping at this point that there'll be no more, because the worst thing that can happen is you get to a semi-final and somebody gets a COVID case, and suddenly a team gets into the final that didn't even play in the semi-final to get there. And I think that's the biggest one. It's, as any fan, I think people would feel bad for Toulon, because you've seen that they played fairly well this season, and to have a game against kind of one of the top sides in Europe, and Leinster, who've in their own right been playing very well this season, it would have been one of those kind of clash of the titan type games. And I think for neutral fans, it was a pity that the game didn't go ahead on Friday.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. It's always nice to see Leinster, especially beaten by Saracen. And
oh yeah, I know.
I forgot to mention I'm a Saracen fan, but still. But no, it's good. It's not a good team, Leinster, I have to say. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess what I'll kind of put you on the spot now is looking at kind of the matchups this kind of for the quarterfinals. What team do you think is the strongest to go on and actually win the competition?
I think it's a tie between Toulon and Racing.
Yeah. And in terms of their performances during the season, who do you think has been more impressive, Toulouse or Racing?
Toulouse.
So you're going for Toulouse to win the Champions Cup then?
Yes. To do a double this year, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I beg your pardon. I said Toulouse for top 14, but emotionally, I would love Racing 92 to win, because it's about time. The owner is like 74 years old. Jackie Lorenzenti has invested a lot of his time, a lot of his money in the club as well. So it'd be a nice present for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last year it was very, very tight. They're very close between Exeter, Racing versus Exeter. It was, I think, played. It was lost in the last minutes of the game. If my memory is good, it was just a fraction.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. They remind me a lot of kind of those Clermont teams that came so close to winning, but just couldn't kind of get over the edge. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been great having you on today. It's always nice being able to kind of talk with some of the French teams, because as kind of an Irish fan, I'm constantly talking about kind of Leinster, Munster, Ireland, some of the English teams, but it's not all, you don't always get a lot of people that can come on and kind of give good detail about even not the top teams in France, but like we've mentioned, a couple of the other teams that are up and coming. It's always interesting to kind of talk about them. So I really I'm thankful that you came on today. Again, where can people find your podcast?
Right, you can find on the usual platform on Apple or Spotify, and it's called French Rugby Connections. Don't forget the connections, because it's all about connections in rugby.
Yeah,
that's why I usually have very good guests. I had Serge Betsen, Olivier Magne, Andrew Mertens. Gavin Hastings last week.
Oh, very good.
But I haven't had any Irish players yet, so I need to work on my connections and get maybe Ronan with your nice one. Okay, because he speaks French. But having said that, he said once he never spoke with his wife about rugby because it was too complicated for her, and he got trashed.
I'm not surprised.
Yes, maybe your wife, but other women understand rugby, the rules of rugby. I think it was in Le Monde or Rugby Atlantique, or Midi Olympique a few years ago, 2 years ago. But I think he's much more cautious. So who knows? I'll try to speak with Ronan if I can, if you have his detail.
Yeah, if that does happen, I'll definitely be listening to that episode of the podcast anyway, because even just listening to him, I know he did an interview with BT Sport after his game, and some of the things that he was talking about in terms of kind of French rugby and the way he wants to play, it was very interesting. I think he has, even though at times, like you said, he can kind of put his foot in it and say the wrong things when he's talking about rugby, he really knows what he's talking about, and it's a very interesting interview, I would say. So hopefully that can happen. I myself would love to talk to him at one stage about it, but hopefully he will get to hear more from Ronan over the next few weeks and see how La Rochelle do at the weekend. Because again, like we mentioned at the start, they're a very interesting story kind of coming up in French rugby. Just want to remind everybody to check out the podcast. We're on all the normal platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Twitter, Instagram, all the social media that you can think of, we're there. So I'm really thankful that you came on today, Veronique, and we'll definitely talk to you again.
Definitely. It was a pleasure to speak with you about rugby.
Thank you so much.
You take care. Thank you.